To present Susan Drucker from Hofstra University and Gary Gumpert from the Urban Communication Foundation. And the presentation is Time-Binding Walls, When Walls Can Talk. Can't do anything without the computer.
Yes, you can.
Okay. Is there a doctor in the house? Anyone to help? Take credit for it, Tom. Okay, well, it's my pleasure to be here with all of you today. And I'm here representing both Gary and me. This is collaborative work. And many of you know that we've been obsessed with cities for quite some time. And we're very interested in the relationship between humans and the built urban structure, which we conceive of as being very active, continually changing, and an environment of sharing. Now, as I said, this is a collaborative work, and Gary and I are just back from Shanghai. We were there on Thursday, and walking out of our hotel, we faced a Pete's Coffee. Now, this probably has little significance to any of you, assuming that neither one of us fall asleep at this meeting due to jet lag. But we stand before you. We're just beginning to get over that jet lag. But our experiences outside of this hotel, and going to this hotel, really underscores what we want to address today. You see, members of Gary's family escaped the Nazis by getting to Shanghai during World War II. And over a period of time, he eventually learned where his grandparents and his uncle lived, and actually his uncle owned a movie theater, so media is in his blood. And so for several years, we've gone back for other reasons to Shanghai, and we've made it our business to try to look for those places, overcoming the fact that the street names, the theater that we've just discovered this picture just a few days ago, apparently it's a beautiful Art Deco theater from designed by a famous architect. But we finally overcame the fact that the street names had changed in the intervening years with the takeover of the Communist Party. And we decided to basically book a hotel in the general vicinity. We had an idea where it was. The general vicinity was a former French concession. And we tried to see what we could find. So upon checking into the hotel, beautiful hotel, by the way, if you ever need a hotel recommendation in Shanghai, upon checking into the hotel, we asked at the front desk about the new name of the former Route du Maire. And they pointed to this street. Now, I've got to tell you that we were under the impression that they clearly did not understand what we were asking about. There wasn't a lot of English spoken, and it was just this look of a lack of comprehension. So we walked outside the hotel, and we noticed this plaque right beyond these columns. We had accidentally and miraculously checked into the hotel directly across the street from the location of Gary's family business.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, it turned out that the theater had been knocked down only 10 years before, and it became Pete's Coffee. Gary loves a good cup of coffee, so fortunately you can get a good cup of coffee there, at least that. So we learned about the movie house. We learned that it had been knocked down in order to build a high-rise and Pete's coffee shop. And we ran across the street, once we learned this, ran across the street, ordered a good cup of coffee, and then started looking for some evidence of what had been there before. And unlike the signage that we found outside the hotel, which gave us a sense of place and gave us a sense of history, we found no evidence. So there was this stark distinction between a place that communicated its past and one that did not, one that stood silent about what had been before. And that underscored the power of the communicative potential and the time-binding media of place. To us, the city speaks in many languages. It speaks in many ways, and we interact with its structures. The walls speak, the windows reflect, ricocheting sounds reverberate. We maneuver through the city accompanied by its smells. And the topic that we just heard Toby deal with digital signage, very much is part of this discussion and the way that we now relate to the city. How many lumens are there in the signage these days? So we process the environment, the complex sensorium that both collects and receives over time. We retain, restore, and experience ourselves within the context of time and place. Now, our senses are triggered by unpredictable traces that we encounter as we walk and we interact with the city. The city is now and what it once was. Now, cities themselves serve a time-binding function. Location, structures, street layouts, maps, paintings, photographs, film, soundscapes, etc. They all preserve the passing information from one generation to another over time. As cities evolve, numerous remnants are left behind. Phantoms can be found in any city, and some of these phantoms are known as ghosts. We're particularly interested in the phantoms that are known as ghost signs, so more on that. In delirious New York, Rem Koolhaas opines that each block in New York City, he's talking about, is covered with several layers of phantom architecture in the form of past occupancies, aborted projects, popular fantasies that provide alternative images to the New York that exists. And some remains of the past are recognized and preserved. Some just are allowed to remain. Some are safeguarded as important pieces of history. And so I just picked two of my favorite cities as examples. These are the shovels or the lollipops of Paris. So as we walk down the street, they speak of the rich history of Paris. And then, of course, the infamous blue dot or blue signs of London. So there's work to preserve and an acknowledgement of letting the city speak of its past. Sometimes you really have to take the time to look for it. How many of you noticed this on the way in? Or took the time to read?
Yes.
Now, those may be the formal ways of preserving history, but there are lots of informal and unintended vestiges of the past that serve as media that link past tales of place, of now, and influence the experience of the city in the here and now. So if you see something like that, do you ever stop, pause, think about what was, how different times were? There's a sense of ambiguity in the dialogue between the participant and the narrative of the ghost sign. And this is what we typically refer to as a ghost sign. There are other forms of ghosts, but this is kind of a classic ghost sign. There are other forms which this takes. So, for example, graffiti would be included in this. And the study that we're doing encompasses the formal landmark signs, graffiti, and ghost signs. And the time that we have today, we're going to focus on the ghost signs. But there's a very rich material to be dealt with the other two kinds of time-binding, communicative artifacts in cities. So we're very interested particularly in the ambiguous narrative of ghost signs and what they say about the past, but also the future and the present of cities. So the city is now, and it once was. Human beings, we know, have the unique capacity to bind time by recording, by preservation, in order to transmit and reach future generations. We build civilizations, we build cities, communicating from the past to the present and the future. Architecture, ghost signs, graffitis, these landmark signs, they all function in this way. And the city can be understood by walking through the city of the past and reading beneath the surface. We experience the city through taking time to look at the images that remain. The city can be understood by walking through, well, flying above somewhat, but certainly by walking through its alleys, its streets, its parks, seen through its windows of homes, and apartments, and businesses. It is a place to live, maybe to protest, to work, transit, play, and there are many ways and means to comprehend and understand it. It's perhaps best revealed in a dynamic process requiring the talent of walking. And I mean walking without the cell phone, staring at the screen in your hand. It is a walk that gives you a vision of the street seen at street level, eyes on street level. It's experienced as a relationship that humans have with place, with urban structures, and it's reciprocal. Now, Finnish architect Juha Pallasmaa has said, buildings and cities are instruments and museums of time. They enable us to see and understand the passing of history and to participate in time cycles that surpass individual life. We're big fans of Pallasmaa, particularly his work on how important using the full sensorium in cities can be. Now, we think this connects with actually something that Corey Anton dealt with just yesterday when he discussed time binding and Korzybski's notion of use values, particularly the materiality of potential use values. When buildings speak, they're capable of transmitting lessons from humanity's childhood. So I'm sorry that Corey's not here because I really wanted to have a long conversation with him about that. What we're really dealing with is what we think of as a conversation between past and present. It's almost impossible to think about triggering of memory without evoking Proust and his infamous Madeline. A Proustian memory is a momentary image that's triggered when the narrator eats the Madeline cookie dipped in tea. And that pristine moment opens a flood of emotion and sensation. So many of us are familiar with this. No sooner had the warm liquid mixed with the crumbs touched my palate than a shudder ran through me, and I stopped, intent upon the extraordinary thing that was happening to me. An exquisite pleasure had invaded my senses, something isolated, detached, with no suggestion of its original. Whence did it come? What did it mean? How could I seize and apprehend it? Now, similarly, the city and its structures trigger dimensions of both present and past. It's a dynamic and a swift evolution that we see in cities these days. And what we find is that quickly the old is overshadowed by what comes. While perhaps new monoliths don't all have a past or trigger memory. Theoretically, each structure has some type of past, something that must have been there before. There's always a potential dialogue, hidden, lurking, between structure and person. So cities speak to people, and there are many who respond. It's a multifaceted dialogue in which the urban landscape communicates. The inanimate structures that constitute a city potentially involve all in that dialogue and require engaging the entire sensorium. So bricks and glass and mortar, they all constitute structures that are part of the communication process. There is a conversation between the past and the present, which is at the heart of our concern. What is required to trigger memory and to trigger imagination? What does an individual bring to that encounter? What does that person take away? Can people take the time to listen to the environment? In a sense, we're talking about kind of an archaeology where there are nature and cultural layers which comprise an archaeological deposit. The strata, or the archaeological layers, contain objects unique in a given strata or period, which enter into that dialogue between past and present. And the urban landscape is filled with layers. Some are exposed, some are unobserved, others are noticed because they come from a conspicuously different time. And those are typically associated with the ghost signs that I mentioned previously. Now, other layers are those from the present that be like graffiti that actually mask the past or modify our understanding of the underlying layer. Historical markers, by the way, seem to cry out, remember me. But the ghost signs of the businesses or the activities of the people from before, that's really kind of at the heart of what we think is very, very rich in some cities. Go back to Koolhaas again, and Koolhaas, in writing about New York, was focusing on some of these layers beneath the surface, how several layers of phantom architecture form a part of understanding the past and therefore the city of today. There have been numerous books written about these phantoms, particularly about ghost signs. One in particular we found very useful by Ben Hasselhoff, who was a fervent aficionado of these kinds of changing facades. And his work really focuses, like Poolhouse, on the Manhattan structures around us. And has an amazing collection of ghost signs in this volume. Ghost signs are signs of before. They're a product of the past, reminders of businesses, events that are no longer. They are often in a state of deterioration. Sometimes they're uncovered just momentarily. So, for example, you may have a ghost appear when a building next door or part of that building is being destroyed and then revealed. So demolition of an adjacent structure may be, at least temporarily, the way that we see some of these revealed. Now, these ghosts are essentially byproducts of aging and of progress. Ghosts are ephemeral. They're temporary. Not everyone sees a ghost in the facade. They are, they can be particularly haunting in a moment of kind of surprise, of discovery. Many times it's that sense of encounter, discovery, that marks the experience of encountering the unexpected of these signs. Now, beyond an exhilarating moment of discovery, the ghost sign becomes the object that will continue to fade and transform into an object of potential permanency. They are, in some cases, transformed into art that's being preserved by some cities. And in some situations, we have some of the signage that is kept and then incorporated into the new use. Now, some of these signs that we've been looking at are actually being transformed kind of as we speak. A couple of them have actually been landmarked, but for the most part, they're kind of on their own in terms of maintaining their existence. I walked by this one, and I think I grew up with a big event was going to this restaurant, and it's a Sleepy's now, and it's another one that I keep looking for some remnant, some ghost. There's actually a new kind of ghost sign that you could argue appeared during the pandemic. It ushered in a period, of an urban landscape devoid of people, and you had glittering signs and marquees around the world. These are from Manhattan that reminded passers-by of the activities that no longer could take place, and so you were kind of in a petrified forest of kind of residual glitter and marquees, and I think it was very interesting to see how they functioned, because you could get online and you could see television images of this kind of landscape, but they became ghosts of what was, at least, thank goodness, temporarily. So just as old signs connect us to the past, these modern signs during the pandemic actually spoke of kind of a recent past self. So a number of books have been written that look at these ghost signs as art objects in particular, and I think that's an interesting way to go. And just in the couple of minutes that remain, I'll just give you a few other examples of things that we're looking at in this regard. One of the images that we find particularly haunting is the images of the automat. Do many of you remember the automat? Okay, so it was introduced in 1912. The last ones kind of went out in 1970. And they were very popular, particularly in Philadelphia and in New York. And you still see remnants of, several remnants around the city of the transformation of the old automats. So you can find the architecture, and then typically there are several locations in the city. This one is on the Upper West Side. Where you can still see those ghost signs nearby. So the end of the automat didn't end kind of the vestiges of the ghosts in the city. They still speak. Now, a couple of other examples of kind of things that we're looking at. This one is a sign that we took in Berlin, and it was for a newspaper that we're trying to determine the age of this fading sign, and we think it's particularly interesting. We were told that it was from a newspaper that was first published in East Berlin in 1945, but it looks as if it may actually have been a pre-war paper advertised from the 1930s. And we think it's interesting that the construction, this new construction, part of the sign is obliterated, but you also have in this image the juxtaposition of the older structure and the new windows. This is a sign from a town in Provence, Oops, and even though we never experienced the town sinking and sitting and having a Dubonnet, it means something to the people locally that did have that experience. And there are still people sitting around and drinking in that environment. This one was provided to us by a colleague, Leo Jeffries, who's a respected urban communications scholar, and he was sharing this, that he passes this all the time on his walks in the morning, and he wrote to us saying, well, this was a ghost sign that really got to him, because he used to go to this store. This is where he used to buy his coffee beans, and he remembers, and again, the sensory experience. He remembers the taste of the homemade focaccia bread with olives and onions and the biscotti that he used to get there. And he wrote to us saying, well, it's amazing how I can remember everything about the taste and the smells that came out of this business, but I can't remember where I parked my car this morning. One last, in just a moment that I've left, one last type of vestige that we've been looking at are ghost walls. So as I said, with walls that turn, when something's torn down and you see the vestige of the outline of what had been there. And certainly Banksy played on that, and the images that evokes. Too bad I don't have time to share this with you. You get the idea. Here we have the ghost and graffiti coming together to evoke memories. The bottom line is that with these images, we find ourselves asking, is it possible to envision structures that leave no memory? Is there necessarily a before? The ghosts that we've spoken about today are benign urban moments that connect us to our experiential past and our current imagination. They are necessary indices of the richness of aging and connection and the bonding of the urban landscape and the human experience. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan.